passage we're looking at this week is known commonly as the Greatest Commandment. It's part of the whole, last two chapters we've been dealing with in Matthew that started off with the temple authorities asking what authority Jesus had to be speaking, and a whole series of parables and question and answers and challenges have proceeded. So it gets to this point, and the Pharisees are realizing the Sadducees are kind of stunned, stupefied by a passage we haven't covered, but certainly go back and read it in Matthew. And then they ask him, what is the greatest commandment? Now remember, these are people who have the Ten Commandments, two versions of them actually, one in Deuteronomy and one in Exodus. And they're asking him to identify which is the greatest of those. Well, Jesus, being Jesus, doesn't actually answer them directly, doesn't give them the answer they're probably expecting or looking for, but he quotes some other stuff, and he says, the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. That's actually a very, very profound scripture in the Hebrew tradition, the Jewish tradition, as well as the Christian tradition. And we recognize that as the central core of what we're called to do. And then Jesus proceeds to quote scripture again and says, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And in Hebrew scripture, neighbor has a extensive connotation. We're talking everybody from those who actually live next door to strangers you've never met, but who might need you for some reason. Refugees fall under this category of stranger. So include the expanse of it. Take care of them. Be good to all people. But something that's often lost in a lot of Christian praxis, especially has a long history in some of the more judgmental ways of living a Christian life, is the third part of this. We're so used to talking about the two parts, but we miss the third part of this, where Jesus tells them, love your neighbor as yourself. That's actually two. And the Christian church has not been very good at the loving God above all else, has not been very good at the loving neighbor, but has been absolutely atrocious with the loving ourselves. Far too often, people have gone to church over the centuries only to hear how bad they are. And that's one of the reasons why people are turning away from the church now when they've got choice and they don't have the social conformity the past generations had to endure. If a community is going to tell you consistently what's wrong with you, you're not going to want to be part of that. And that's something that is part of the community. It's not part of the faith. And there's a huge distinction there. Just because someone goes to churches and they hear similar messages of hate or disinterest or dislike, it does not mean that that's ever a message that Jesus gave. And it's passages like what we're looking at today that have the opportunity to make us stop and look and think about what that can mean for our progress as Christians, for how we interact with people. I've heard so many stories over the years, people who wanted to volunteer do something in the church and had another idea, but it was shut down because it's not the way it was done before, and you're an outsider, you don't know any better. That is so harmful. That person, that family, never returned. An opportunity missed, absolutely. But beyond that, there was just the compounding and I can't even think of the word, the permission giving to see all Christians as that level of negative, simply because it was done in a Christian context, in a church context. I was this week talking with a friend of mine about how to deal with children who are doing some gender questioning, what that's going to look like, how we address that as a community, as a faith community. And she was telling me about her experience with her child, how the grandmother won't even try. The great-grandfather made efforts, but the grandmother won't even try to recognize what the child has asked that they be seen as, the pronouns they're being used. But this grandmother professes to be a very obedient, respectful, attentive Christian. But she's not following the basic tenets of our faith: love. And love, it's got so many connotations. So often in our Western world, we just look at the one, the eros. But there are six versions of what love was in the Greek community. And the one that Jesus was talking about was agape. Agape is the love of neighbor, the inclusion of the other in um, a community relationship that surpasses just mere friendship. It's the desire to have good things happen for someone else. And you can have agape for someone you can't even stand. You can want them to have a really fabulous life. It doesn't have to mean you're involved in it personally, but you can want them, the best for them, as far away from you as you want. That is agape. That is the shared love of the stranger, of the neighbor. And that is one of the loves that we're talking about in this scripture. But the love of self, how can we start to bring that to a community? Too often, people think if we talk about self love, we're talking about some kind of perversion of how we view ourselves, a level of narcissism. And in order to avoid that level of narcissism, we've kind of gone on the other direction and thought that if we criticize the person first or don't play up their gifts, then they won't get to the narcissistic place, which psychologists might have an opinion on that. But as people of faith, we've really missed the ball. We've really lost an opportunity here. When Jesus said, love our neighbors as ourselves, the crucial element in that is not neighbor, it's ourselves. How can we give love if we can't love who we are? Why are we as a Christian community missing that tenet? Why are we not shouting from the rafters? If your inside and your outside don't feel like they mesh, then do something with the outside, and we're here to celebrate you. As long as you don't hurt yourself or you don't hurt others, do what you need to do. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not looking at the person who's in an abusive relationship and saying, you are loved and worthy? We as a community are going to stand with you wherever your journey takes you and try to support what has to happen. None of this, you just live with it because it's too messy for us to get involved with. Self-love, the love of self, should be the person abused being able to say, this is wrong, I need to be out of this situation, and I need help, and I need my neighbors to stand up for me. All of this is part of what Jesus wanted for us. And it is not narcissism. And it is not self-inflation. It's the primal need we have to recognize the good in us, what we bring to the table, the beauty that God created, our perfect beings. We need to celebrate that. We need to share that. We need to talk about that. We need to identify that, because until we are able to be secure in ourselves, we can't possibly be the people who love others the way we are called to be. Now, if we spend time in Gospel of Luke, for instance, where it's the kind of get in there, get dirty social justice gospel, it's really easy to go through the methods of what social justice looks like, because it's a very active, it's a very physical thing, and that's how it should be for the majority part of it. But Matthew asks us something different. Matthew is not the get in and get dirty gospel. Matthew is the do the work inside so that you're ready to do the outside work gospel. The inside work includes accepting ourselves and being in a community that can accept us for who we are, with all of our warts, with all of our beauty marks, with all of our questions, with all of our discomfort and disquiet. How we accept ourselves, how we accept others allowing to be themselves, is a profound part of God's world, God's community. It is not just that we're projecting out. We have to remember that we have to project in as well. That is part of what love looks like. If we truly believe that God created the world, if we truly believe that God created us in God's image, then everybody, by definition, has to be a perfect human being. Nature sometimes screws up. God does not. God made us all who we are. If nature is something we have to adjust, we'll do that. But the essence of who we are is what allows us to love our neighbor, and to love God. Until we are in a place where we see the beauty in ourselves and are able to share that, then we can't possibly meet the criteria, meet the standard of what we know as the greatest commandments. Love is a very personal thing. Its action only happens through doing. But the motion behind it is something that has to start in a healthy place. And if we constantly tell people that they're not good enough for the church, not only are we being complete hypocrites and not representing God honestly, but we're missing an opportunity to have someone else show us what the love of God can look like. The greatest commandments: love God with everything in our being, all of our strength, all of our thoughts, all of our hearts, all of our being, but to love others and to love ourselves. All of this together is the greatest commandment God has ever given. And it's something we should be paying a little more attention to as we move forward as a community of faith.